The diner was alive with the sounds of clinking silverware, the low hum of conversation, and the occasional burst of laughter from the group of truckers at the counter. The scent of sizzling bacon and fresh coffee filled the air. But for Molly Harper, the only thing she noticed was the ache in her feet and the relentless ticking of the clock above the register. She had been on her feet since noon, weaving through tables with trays stacked high, refilling coffees, and taking orders with the kind of practiced efficiency that came from years of hustling. Her long brown hair was pulled into a messy ponytail, and the dark circles beneath her eyes were evidence of another night spent worrying about bills. Raising a 6-year-old daughter alone while working double shifts left little room for anything else. The diner's bell jingled, drawing Molly's attention to the entrance. A family of 4 stepped inside, their faces tight with exhaustion but their eyes scanning the room with quiet hope. Molly had seen that look before. The father, a man in his early 40s, walked in first, his shoulders slightly hunched, as if carrying a weight heavier than the frayed jacket he wore. His hand instinctively drifted to his pocket, checking for a wallet that likely held more air than cash. Behind him, the mother gently squeezed the hands of her 2 children, a boy no older than 5 and a girl around 10. She offered a small, reassuring smile, but the tightness in her expression betrayed her. This was not a casual night out. Molly noticed how the boy clutched his sister's hand, his wide eyes darting to the plates of food at nearby tables, his stomach clearly winning the battle against pride. The girl stood a little straighter, probably old enough to understand her parents' struggles, but still young enough to hold on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, tonight would be different. Molly swallowed, forcing a smile as she grabbed 4 menus from behind the counter. "Just the 4 of you tonight?" she asked, her voice warm despite the sinking feeling in her chest. The father hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, if you have a booth." Molly led the family to a booth by the window, noticing how the father hesitated before sitting down, his eyes scanning the menu with cautious calculation. His wife sat beside him, her posture stiff, as if bracing for disappointment. The children, however, lit up instantly, their small fingers eagerly tracing the pictures of burgers, pancakes, and thick milkshakes. For a moment, hunger was forgotten in the excitement of possibility. Molly recognized this scene all too well. She had been on the other side of it, sitting at a table with an empty wallet, forcing a brave smile for Ellie, pretending things weren't as bad as they were. She had lost count of the nights she had skipped meals so her daughter wouldn't go to bed hungry. The ache of an empty stomach was easier to endure than the guilt of letting Ellie feel it. The father cleared his throat, breaking Molly's thoughts. "Just 2 grilled cheese sandwiches," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "We'll share." Molly's heart clenched. The kids' hopeful expressions didn't falter, but she knew how hard it was for a parent to say those words, to pretend half a meal was enough when it never truly was. For a moment, she considered walking away, letting them manage on their own. She was barely scraping by herself. But then, she looked at the boy, still eyeing the milkshake section. His lips parted as if he wanted to ask for one but didn't dare. Her decision was made. "Actually," Molly said, forcing a bright tone, "tonight's special is on me. Burgers, fries, milkshakes, the works." She ignored the father's stunned look and the mother's wide eyes. This was the right thing to do. A hush fell over the table as Molly's words sank in. The father stiffened, his jaw tightening as if preparing to argue. The mother's eyes widened, and for a brief second, she looked as though she might cry. "Oh no, we couldn't," the mother whispered, her voice trembling. "That's far too generous." The father gave a stiff nod, his pride wrestling with his gratitude. "We appreciate it, but we can't accept charity." Molly understood that reaction too well. Pride had a way of making struggle even harder. She had felt the sting of refusing help, even when she needed it most. She smiled, kind but firm. "It's not charity. It's my treat." She glanced at the children, who were still holding their breath, their eyes flickering between their parents and Molly. Let the kids enjoy their meal. No strings attached. The father exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. The mother clutched his hand, her grip tight, as if silently pleading for him to accept. Finally, he nodded. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We won't forget this." Molly just waved him off. "Don't worry about it." As she turned to walk away, she caught the moment the children realized what had just happened, their faces lighting up like fireworks. "Really? We can get anything?" the little boy asked, his voice squeaky with excitement. The mother let out a small, tearful laugh, brushing a hand across her cheek. "Yes, sweetheart. Anything." The girl, who had been trying so hard to act mature, suddenly beamed. "I want a milkshake." The boy bounced in his seat. "Me too." Molly chuckled, feeling a strange mix of warmth and sadness. This was something so small, yet to them it meant the world. As she placed their order, she did the math in her head. Covering this meal meant skipping something for herself this week. But as she glanced back and saw the boy giggling, the girl kicking her feet excitedly, and the mother wiping away silent tears of relief, Molly knew it was worth it. From the farthest corner of the diner, James Bennett lowered his coffee cup and watched. Dressed in a tailored navy suit, he looked entirely out of place in this small-town eatery. His silver wristwatch gleamed under the dim lights, and the half-eaten slice of pie in front of him suggested he'd been here for a while. He had been watching the waitress, the one with tired eyes and a weary but unwavering smile. The one who, despite clearly being exhausted, chose kindness over self-preservation. James had seen it all. The hesitation in her posture when she overheard the family whisper about only ordering 2 sandwiches. The way her fingers gripped the menu just a little tighter, as if debating whether to step in or walk away. And then, the moment she made the decision, the firm kindness in her voice as she told them the meal was on her. The father's initial resistance, the mother's silent gratitude, and the children's sheer joy. James had spent years navigating the corporate world, building companies, making investments, and sitting through boardroom negotiations that revolved around profits, not people. But this was something real. He studied Molly as she returned to the counter, placing the family's order with a quiet urgency. She wasn't rich, she wasn't famous, but she had just given away what little she had to help strangers. James tilted his head, thoughtful. Who was this woman? And more importantly, did she even realize how rare she was? He took another sip of his coffee, his mind already made up. He needed to talk to her. Molly was wiping down the counter when she heard the clearing of a throat. She glanced up and nearly did a double take. The man in the expensive suit. She had noticed him before, but she had been too busy to give him much thought. Now he was standing before her, a curious expression on his face. That was impressive. His voice was smooth, confident, but warm. Molly frowned slightly. "I'm sorry." The man gestured subtly toward the booth where the family sat, now laughing over their burgers and milkshakes. "What you did for them. That was," he paused, as if searching for the right word. "Rare." Molly shifted uncomfortably, brushing her hands on her apron. "It was nothing, really. It didn't look like nothing." He studied her, intrigued. "You didn't hesitate. Even though I'd bet good money you could use the help yourself." Molly stiffened. Who was this guy? And why was he so interested? She crossed her arms, suddenly wary. "Is there something I can help you with, mister?" "Bennett." He extended a hand. "James Bennett." Molly hesitated before shaking it. His grip was firm but not overpowering. He wasn't trying to intimidate her. He was just watching, reading her like an open book. "Well, James," she said, pulling her hand back, "I appreciate the kind words, but I've got work to do." James smirked slightly. "Fair enough. I won't keep you long." He slipped a card from his pocket and set it on the counter. "But I'd like to talk to you again, if you're open to it." Molly eyed the card but didn't pick it up. "About what?" James tilted his head, still studying her. "Let's just say, I believe in rewarding good people." Molly's stomach twisted. That sounded too much like charity. And charity made her uncomfortable. "I don't need a handout," she said, voice firm. James's lips quirked up in a small smile. "Good. Because that's not what I'm offering." He tapped the card once and slid it closer to her. Just think about it. Then, without another word, he walked toward the door. The bell jingled softly behind him, leaving Molly staring at the card and wondering just what the hell had just happened. Molly had almost convinced herself to forget about James Bennett. People like him, polished, wealthy, important, didn't just stroll into small-town diners handing out opportunities to struggling waitresses. It didn't happen. And yet, the business card sat in her apron pocket, its crisp edges pressing against her leg with every step she took. She refused to acknowledge it, refused to let hope creep in, until the note arrived. Lisa, one of the other waitresses, approached her during the late afternoon lull, a small white envelope in her hands. "Some guy just dropped this off for you," she said, raising an eyebrow. Tall, suit, looked serious. Molly's stomach flipped. She took the envelope carefully, feeling the weight of it before slowly tearing it open. Inside was a simple, handwritten note. "Molly, I understand if you're hesitant, but I meant what I said last night. I believe in rewarding kindness, and I'd like to help you, if you're willing to meet. I'll be at the coffee shop on Main Street at 6 p.m. tonight. No obligation, no expectations, just a conversation. James Bennett." Molly exhaled sharply, her fingers tightening around the paper. This was insane. Why would a man like James Bennett care about her? Why would he take the time to write a note, to insist on a meeting, to offer her what exactly? An opportunity? A trap? A game she didn't know the rules to? Her gut told her to walk away. And yet, a tiny, reckless part of her wanted to go. Molly almost turned around 3 times before stepping inside the coffee shop. The little bell above the door chimed as she entered, and she immediately spotted James Bennett, seated near the window, a steaming cup of coffee in front of him. He was relaxed, composed, as if this meeting were nothing out of the ordinary. But to Molly, this felt like stepping into unknown territory. She hesitated, half expecting him to look impatient, smug, like a man who was used to people jumping at his offers. Instead, when he saw her, he smiled. Not condescending, not arrogant, just warm. "Molly," he said, standing to greet her. "I'm glad you came." She wasn't sure she was. Sliding into the chair across from him, she wrapped her hands around the mug of coffee the barista had just placed in front of her, letting the warmth calm her nerves. "You said you wanted to talk," she said cautiously. "So talk." James leaned forward, folding his hands together. "I won't waste your time, Molly. I saw what you did for that family last night. You didn't hesitate to help them, even though it was clear you're struggling too." Molly bristled. "I'm not looking for a handout." "Good, because that's not what this is." He pulled a white envelope from his jacket pocket and slid it across the table. Molly stared at it. She didn't reach for it, didn't even breathe. "What is this?" "A check." James's voice remained calm. "For $10,000. Molly's heart stopped. Her hands clenched into fists in her lap. This had to be a joke. "No," she shook her head, pushing the envelope back toward him. "I don't know what game this is, but I don't need charity." James smiled slightly. "I told you, Molly. This isn't charity." She could feel her pulse pounding in her ears. "Then what is it?" He exhaled, as if carefully choosing his words. "It's an investment. In you." Molly blinked. "In me?" James nodded. "I believe good people deserve chances. Real ones. You stepped up when no one was watching. You put someone else first when you had every reason to walk away. People like you are rare, Molly. And I think you deserve a chance to get ahead for once." She stared at him, stunned. A storm of doubt, fear, and something dangerously close to hope swirling inside her. Could she trust this? Could she trust him? And more terrifyingly, could she trust herself to say yes? For 2 weeks, the envelope sat untouched in Molly's top dresser drawer. Every night after putting Ellie to bed, she would pull it out, stare at the check, and then tuck it right back where it was. $10,000. It was enough to pay off overdue bills, put food in the fridge, even start a small savings account. It was enough to make life a little easier. But it was also terrifying. She had spent years scraping by, learning how to survive on just enough. And now, A stranger had walked in and handed her a way out. It didn't feel real. Felt like a fairy tale, and Molly didn't believe in fairy tales anymore. One evening, as she sat at the kitchen table, mulling over the check again, she felt a small presence beside her. Ellie climbed onto her lap, peering at the paper in her mother's hands. "What's that, Mommy?" Molly hesitated, glancing at her daughter's wide, innocent eyes. "It's something that could help us." Ellie tilted her head. "Then why do you look sad?" Molly let out a breathless chuckle. "I don't know, sweetheart. I guess I'm scared." Ellie frowned. "You always tell me to be brave." Molly's throat tightened. "Yeah," she whispered. Ellie nodded, resting her head against her mother's chest. "I think you should be brave too." Molly swallowed the lump in her throat, looking at the check again. For the first time, she didn't feel fear. She felt possibility. The next morning, before she could talk herself out of it, she pulled out James Bennett's business card and dialed the number. James Bennett. His voice was calm, steady. Molly took a deep breath. "It's me, Molly Harper." A pause. Then, a knowing smile in his voice. "I was hoping you'd call." Molly finally took the leap. Molly never thought she'd step foot in a classroom again. But here she was, sitting in a community college lecture hall with a notebook full of scribbled notes, her fingers cramping from writing so fast. She had enrolled in a business management course, something James had recommended after their second meeting. "You don't just need money, Molly, you need knowledge. You need tools." So she had taken his advice. But juggling work, school, and being a single mother was exhausting. Her days were a whirlwind. Waking up before dawn, making sure Ellie was ready for daycare, rushing to work at the diner, squeezing in study sessions between shifts, and then collapsing into bed long past midnight. Some nights, she questioned if she had made a mistake. Was she really smart enough for this? Capable enough? When her first business paper came back with a C+, she nearly quit. She sat in her car that night, staring at the grade with a crushing sense of failure, until her phone rang. "James." "Rough day?" he asked, already knowing the answer. Molly sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I don't think I can do this, James. I'm just tired." "Good." His response caught her off guard. "Because tired means you're working for something." Molly swallowed, staring at the grade again. "I just don't want to fail." "Then don't." James's voice was steady. "Failing would be giving up." "You're not giving up, Molly. You're learning. And learning takes time." She exhaled, the tension in her shoulders loosening. Maybe he was right, so she kept going. Months passed, and Molly slowly began to see a change. She wasn't just passing her classes. She was excelling. She found herself fascinated by entrepreneurship, jotting down ideas for a small cafe she had always dreamed of running but never thought possible. James remained a constant guide, helping her navigate job opportunities, finances, and even finding a better daycare for Ellie. It wasn't easy. There were still days of doubt, exhaustion, and fear. But for the first time in years, Molly wasn't just surviving. She was building something. And this time, she wouldn't let it slip away. The soft hum of conversation, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee, and the clinking of silverware filled the cozy cafe. Molly Harper stood behind the counter, wiping her hands on her apron as she glanced around. The cafe was full. Her cafe. Ellie's corner. She had dreamed of this moment for years, but even now, it felt surreal. Warm wooden tables, shelves lined with books, a chalkboard menu with her carefully curated recipes. It was everything she had envisioned. The door chimed, and her heart nearly stopped. James Bennett stepped inside. He looked just as he had the first time she saw him in the diner. Polished, composed, effortlessly confident. But there was something else now, something softer in his expression. Pride. Molly stepped out from behind the counter, wiping an invisible speck of dust from her apron as James approached. "So," he said, glancing around, "this is what happens when a waitress takes a leap of faith." Molly let out a small laugh, shaking her head. "No, this is what happens when someone believes in you." James smiled, gesturing toward the counter. "Well, I think I'll have a coffee." Black, just like last time. Molly smirked, pouring him a fresh cup and sliding it across the counter. First customer of the day. No charge. James picked up the cup and raised it slightly. Here's to paying it forward. Molly met his gaze, feeling the weight of everything that had led to this moment. The night in the diner. The envelope she almost didn't open. The fear, the struggle, the growth. And now, standing in the place she built with her own hands, she finally understood. Kindness had come full circle. She lifted her own cup, meeting his toast, to paying it forward, and as she looked around her bustling cafe, she knew this was just the beginning.